this is a little bit different from what we've had during the previous keynotes. We're going to do a panel discussion, and the topic is Bitcoin. So we're going to talk a little bit about Bitcoin. Some of you might not know what Bitcoin is. We'll talk a little bit about that. Let's start off with, let the panelists introduce themselves and talk a little bit about why they're here, and then we'll go from there.
How's it going? My name is Luke Stokes. I'm the co-founder of FoxyCart, which is an e-commerce platform. And kind of the reason I'm up here is, I guess, in April of 2013, we started supporting Bitcoin on our platform as an e-commerce developer through BitPay, actually. And I actually started getting into Bitcoin early 2013, and it blew my mind. It's incredible, incredible technology, and I hope to talk a lot more about that today. But I also wanted to say, if you don't know anything about Bitcoin, feel free to ask, the dumb question. There are no dumb questions. It's a really amazing technology, and a lot of people don't know about it. So it's okay to go ahead and ask simple questions. We're here to help and answer anything that we can.
All right, I'm Rich Morgan. I'm the e-commerce development team lead at BitPay, like Luke said, that we're all learning more and more about Bitcoin itself as a technology. So yeah, definitely, there's no dumb question. Ask away.
I'm Joel Dietz, the founder of Swarm, crowdfunding platform built with Bitcoin technology. And I guess you have an interesting mix here of sort of the 1.0 technologies, which focus primarily on payment, of which BitPay is an awesome example, and then the new sorts of technologies that are now being built with blockchain technology, of which crowdfunding is one of the biggest applications that we see.
So let's take just a second, fellas. There may be folks in here who have maybe not even heard of Bitcoin and don't know what it is. So if each of you could kind of take a turn and share with us a little bit of the Bitcoin technology and why it is what it is.
I think the best answer to that comes from Andreas Antonopoulos. He talks about Bitcoin is not necessarily money for the internet. It's not just a digital currency. It's actually like the internet of money. And then he goes on to say the currency aspect of Bitcoin is just the first application on top of a larger technology called blockchain technology. And for me, I got excited about it when I started learning about how the banking system currently works and certain flaws that it has, and I realized that this technology has the ability to let individuals exchange value with other individuals without any counterparty risk. And there's some really incredible things that can be done on top of that technology. So in essence, Bitcoin to me is a ledger system, which money is kind of basically just a ledger, and it's one of the best ledger systems ever created. It's fully decentralized, fully provable with cryptography, not with trust in an individual. And as we're going to hear a little bit more about, the 2.0 technologies, the things that can be built on top of that blockchain are pretty incredible. Things that today require centralization, require you to trust somebody else, don't need that anymore with the blockchain technology. You can actually say, wow, we can do this with math. And so you're going to eliminate fraud. You're going to give people more individual control and liberty and freedom. And so there's some things about it that really excite me.
Yeah, absolutely. It is really exciting technology, and this is probably working with Bitcoin is the most fun I've ever had as a developer, because I tell people it's like where Bitcoin is now. It's almost like where the internet was in like 1993. We're really it's really about on that verge of ready to take off, and Bitcoin as a technology, it's a completely different paradigm. So when you approach the technology as a currency, and my expertise is from the currency aspect of it. You really have to kind of shift your mindset a bit. Some of the questions you may ask and may pertain to traditional forms of payment, credit cards or ACH drafts and stuff. It doesn't apply to Bitcoin necessarily, and there's new methods for transferring money, and it's really exciting.
Yeah, I thought Luke's explanation was an awesome one, and it took a while for that to sink in for me. But if you think of it as a completely distributed network, it's sort of Bitcoin is the first way to sort of create a massively distributed network, and the reason it's able to do that is because there's this novel incentivization mechanism, and that is the coin itself, the Bitcoin. So sometimes you're referring to it as a network, sometimes referring to it as the actual token that's being transferred. But that idea of having a distributed network that you can do things on top of that has this sort of interesting incentivization scheme has a ton of applications into other areas, and particularly the way to do any kind of incentivize any particular type of behavior. So I don't know. I think there's just so many interesting applications of this technology that haven't even been thought of yet.
Yeah.
So why, starting with Joel this time, come from the other side, why do you feel Bitcoin is important?
I feel it's important because, you know, there's this old, like, kind of, you know, in the financial literature or whatever else, like, you know, currency systems used to be based on gold, you know, predominantly. And that was something that was provably scarce and, you know, fungible, and, you know, you could trade and it had a store of value. And over time, you know, we've kind of moved away from that, and obviously a lot of banking systems now sort of print money at will, and, you know, there's not a lot of accountability for the people who are doing the printing of money. So the kind of interesting idea of going back and saying, well, how can we take a network and actually introduce scarcity in a fixed way that is supported by the whole network is fascinating and not valuable only in the context of something like a currency, but also value in the context of something like a share in a project. You know, sort of stock has similar properties to that. But anything that, like, where you want to be sure that something is going to continue to exist and not be, like, generated at will is a potential application there. So that's sort of how I see things evolving, and you know, there's just a big need in that in the global ecosystem for some sort of stable kind of store of value that is easily transportable.
Yeah, it's very, very easily transportable, and that's one of the major benefits of using Bitcoin is, you know, if you're a developer in another country and you're being paid, you know, by a U.S. company, you know, if you're dealing with the bank drafts or, you know, money transfers, you're going to pay, or the employer's going to pay very large fees for that. But with Bitcoin, you know, if they're paying you directly, you know, apart from a small mining fee, which is optional, you know, there's really very little to no fees involved at all, and it's instant money transfer. It's secure, and there's just, you know, there's from the money perspective, you know, it's just a really great transfer of wealth vehicle, and all the cool things that are coming out now with the you know, the 2.0 applications of technology. We just had like a wedding somehow. I don't even know how that happened, but somehow a wedding was involved in the blockchain or something. I guess to mark the, I don't know.
Yeah, I can fill in there. In fact, I'm sort of responsible actually for creating the first sort of marriage contract. And it's a really cool thing. Like the first, you know, application, as I like to describe it, is like really anything you want can be a currency. Like people have chosen shells and all kinds of things. And say we're all up here, we all like beer. We're like, oh, beer is a currency. And then we're like, okay, now we're going to distribute the beer on, you know, like a network, and we like trade it with each other or something. Fine, but like some of this 2.0 technology is more like you take that, you know, bottle of beer or whatever it is that you're using the currency. And then you put a computer chip inside of that and say, hey, now, like, you know, go to Scott after, like, you know, 2 minutes or something like that. And it actually has this programmability built into the token itself, which if you start thinking about for a bit, you're like, whoa, like there's just so many interesting things that, like types of escrow systems, everything else that had to always pass through some kind of third party before, that now can all be done, you know, completely programmatically. And the interesting one is like a marriage, in the sense that you can go and say, okay, like we're going to make an agreement that all this money is commonly held and can only be released if both of us agree, which is not the only thing you want from a marriage, but maybe one component. And then if we both like dissolve, you know, that bond of it, then, you know, it'll be distributed to kind of both of us equally or something like that. And that is something that is totally doable within the context of these 2.0 technologies.
I think one thing you guys touched on a little bit is, for me personally, what I'm really excited about is that idea that an individual can control their own store of value. And that's something that is super powerful when you think about I mean, where things are going with governments and censorship and different things like that. I mean, this is kind of, again, my personal perspective on it. The reason we built FoxyCard is we think that people should be able to do voluntary exchange. When people do that and it's mutually beneficial, like the world becomes a better place. And we provide it, we want to build technology that does that through shopping cart technology. Developers can easily add e-commerce, add the ability to do that. And Bitcoin takes that to another level, where, as you were saying, across border, cross any kind of inflationary pressure or monetary controls that maybe a corrupt regime has implemented in a certain geographic region, Bitcoin gives us the ability to break through that and, again, give that individual the control of their own labor. You know, they're working really hard, they're storing that value somewhere, and now nobody can just take it away. It can't be inflated to zero. We have an understanding of, even to the year 2140, how many Bitcoins are going to be in existence. It's a known value over time, the way the algorithm is, the way the protocol is. It's just like TCP/IP or HTTP. There's known ways that you can deal with this technology. And based on that, people can have, you know, solid assumptions. It's not like we have today with the financial markets where just they're all over the place. And one of the personalities I really like to follow on this is the CEO of Overstock.com, Patrick Byrne. He talks about, you know, his experience with the Wall Street kind of banking cartels, if you will, and he realized, like, wow, there's a lot of corruption over here. And that's one of the reasons his company accepts Bitcoin, one of the reasons he's passionate about it, and he's talking about doing stock certificates and paying his vendors and his employees in Bitcoin because he sees it's a way, again, to move forward with more freedom and liberty, which is, again, something I just get really excited about.
Yeah, and I think that, like, tendency in saying Wall Street is something that really is a more fundamental issue, and that anytime you have some, like, middleman who, like, serves as a toll keeper, you know, that toll keeper is just going to become dumber and dumber and just say, like, hey, like, just give me as much tolls as I could possibly get. And legal infrastructure moves in that direction, like all these kind of banking infrastructure moves in that direction, and they become more, like, you know, opposed to any kind of innovation as it goes on. And this sort of stuff, decentralization, is like, look, like, we don't need these, like, middlemen. We can go around them or just do it, like, directly peer-to-peer. And there's just tons of, like, possibilities that open up because of that.
So you're talking a lot about the technology and things that are going on. Let's look at that a little bit more. So besides the use of it as a currency, what use cases do you see in the blockchain, and what excites you most about that tech?
For me, like, for example, I'm from Nashville, Tennessee, and we started an organization called the Tennessee Bitcoin Alliance. And as part of that, as becoming a nonprofit organization, we have to have our bylaws, and they have to be usually notarized. Well, we used a website called proofofexistence.com, and it's a really incredible way of thinking about the blockchain technology, where you can take a document, in this case a signed PDF, because I was a secretary, I had to go and do this. You take it and put it on this website, and they take a hash of it, and you pay a small amount of Bitcoin, and they take a hash and put it on the blockchain. So now across the world, that blockchain, that ledger that everyone has a shared copy of, agrees that this document, unmodified, exists at this timestamp, and that this is the owner of it because I have that private key. So again, that's kind of like a notary service that someone built out of blockchain technology. Another one that's really interesting is onename.io. They use Namecoin, which is kind of an alternate, not Bitcoin, but an altcoin, that does identity services through Bitcoin. And that same kind of thing, and it's kind of neat about their deal is you validate through your GitHub account, your Twitter account, different systems like that. So you can say, hey, I am who I say I am. So if I provide a service for you and you want to pay me, you can go to onename.io, verify that I'm the correct person, and send me my funds directly. And that way, they know no one's going to intercept that, no one's going to accidentally pay the wrong person. So I just think there's a lot of really interesting technologies on top of, they call them the Bitcoin 2.0 technologies, which it sounds like you guys are involved in quite a bit. You know, voting systems, crowdfunding systems. I mean, there's some incredible ways that we can do things. And now we see a lot of corruption in. And as developers, we kind of want the world to be a meritocracy. We want the best things to work. And then we see this corruption just aggravates us. We're like, that shouldn't be that way. Well, Bitcoin is a way that we can actually get around that via, again, technology. Not just trusting someone, but saying, hey, this is cryptography. It's physics, basically. It just works. And it's pretty exciting.
Sure, and the technology is completely open source, like we touched on. So you know, you can examine the white paper that originally kind of started this whole technological movement, and it's provable. The equations are published. You can write your own libraries to interface with the network, and like we were saying, you can use these technology called colored coins to attach contracts. I mean, the limitations to Bitcoin really are just whatever you might artificially place on it, by your imagination. I mean, there are really no limits to what we can do with this technology. It's really amazing.
Yeah, I can give a couple examples from our first class of startups that are launching on the 5th of November, because they illustrate some really novel uses of this technology. And one of them is, issuing a sort of coin on top of the Bitcoin blockchain. So it's sort of like a third layer almost. And then tying actual intellectual property rights through existing legal contracts to that token and say, like, this person has a license to use any of this particular amount of data through this token. And it's sort of like an interesting interplay where it's like this token is totally fungible, it's tradable, it can be given, it can potentially appreciate or depreciate in value, but it's like totally out there on this decentralized network. And then it gives me access to something else over here. And we're seeing a lot of interesting things where there's a tangible, like, co-working space or desk lease or, actual fuel offering for kind of APIs and stuff like that. And that is actually tied to this token that's over here on top of the whole Bitcoin blockchain, which is just, there's like a ton of different things we're just seeing because we get all these applications of projects that want to sort of crowdfund through our platform. And yeah, there's just a lot of really, really interesting things. So going from things that are totally programmatic to things that are kind of tied into existing infrastructure in some way, but still would benefit from that sort of greater or loss of friction, I guess you could say, that comes through that technology set.
So let's build on that just a little bit. I mean, we're talking about the technology. We're talking about a lot of pieces, right? Because it's so widely, it can be used. So what do you see as some threats to Bitcoin? And again, that doesn't necessarily mean technology, right? It could be a lot of different things. So what do you feel are some possible pitfalls, some threats that are out there along with the Bitcoin?
I think one of the big things that's been in the news quite a bit is what's going on in New York with the bit licensing. So in a sense, regulation, and threat is maybe a strong word. I think as we saw with the peer-to-peer file sharing industries, like, you can't really stop it unless you shut down the internet. So basically those companies have to evolve, and eventually we get like iTunes and stuff like that. So I think that there are going to be a lot of attempts by the embedded centralized corporations that say, hey, this is a threat to us. We make all of our living off of these fees that individuals just don't need anymore. So they're going to push back, and they're going to probably use governments, and you're already seeing this in sub-governments where they've kind of made it illegal to use Bitcoin because it threatens their own currency control. And so I think that regulation will probably slow adoption, probably make it more difficult. But ultimately, I believe that people are ready for this. The technology itself is so incredible. It would be amazing if they didn't end up moving forward with it. So I think regulation would be a big part of that challenge. I mentioned previously Andreas Antonopoulos, and one of the best videos I think out there right now is he recently testified in front of the Canadian Banking Commission. Like, the government came and brought him in and said, hey, we're being asked to do a paper on this to suggestions on how we should regulate it as a government. What do you think? And it was a phenomenal presentation.
Yeah, it was very good.
It was, I mean, he walked through all the different things. By the end of it, they're like, tell us what to do, Andreas. I mean, should we regulate it? Should we do nothing? What should we do? And he clarified that they should help clarify its tax status. Because even with foreign currencies today, he wants it to be treated as a foreign currency. If I go to another country and I use their currency and then I come back, they don't treat that as long-term capital gains. It was obviously just a currency exchange. But if I go there and I buy stock in a company or something like that in a different currency and I hold it for 10 years, well, okay, then that's different. We're going to tax that differently. So he was just saying, just clarify how you're going to treat it so we can act accordingly, but don't regulate it. And there's actually Sean King in Nashville, who's part of our organization, the Tennessee Bitcoin Alliance. He wrote a great paper to the guys in New York on the bit licensing thing saying, look at how we regulated the internet, or more appropriately, how we didn't regulate it. Because there are things that we saw where, wait, this internet thing is way bigger than just like telecommunications phone call networks. It's way bigger than that. And they're kind of not putting a heavy hand on it. It allows us, many of us, to have a job because the internet is so incredible what it grew to be. And it's very similar with Bitcoin, saying if the regulations are not too heavy-handed, if we realize the innovations that we can't actually stop anyway, they're inevitable, I think that's going to be good. But so regulation is probably be a biggest threat for slowing things down.
Yeah, and let me say that by overwhelming majority, Bitcoin is legal throughout the world. There's only, I think, maybe 3 or 4 countries where it's completely outright banned. But for the most part, throughout the world, it's completely legal. And here in the United States, the IRS has determined that, for accounting purposes, Bitcoin is property, so you pay taxes on that. Just use common sense, just like any other form of currency. Make sure you keep accounting of it, pay your taxes, and there's really no issues with that. So.
I think there's two main threats to Bitcoin. One is clearly regulation, and it can either come down too harsh, which is bad, and that's certainly the case with some of these 2.0 technologies, which are like novel things, and some of these things are in sort of gray areas right now as to whether or not it should be treated as a securities offering or not. And if they come down very harshly, it'll definitely slow down the growth of things or drive things kind of underground, which is not what we want to do. And the other hand, keeping it totally unregulated, means that there's a lot of questions in everyone's minds, which is sort of where it is now, is like, how is this going to be treated? And so that also is preventing people who, from more traditional business models from getting involved, because there's just these open questions. So being on one side or the other is a little bit dangerous. And then also it's worth saying something about the fact that the Bitcoin network requires a lot of sort of hashing power from these things called miners to participate. And there's a bit of just an overall tendency towards centralization in those things that is a little bit troubling as far as specialty hardware, and then it's a little bit hard to know how that's going to evolve over the years. So it's like maybe no longer one central issuer, but so long as you have one central hardware provider and one central sort of farm, then effectively that person is controlling the network. So that's a danger. I don't think it's going to kill things, because I think people are aware of it, but it is something to be concerned about. So
what are some areas that you think, obviously this is a PHP conference, we're PHP developers, and this is something that would seem on the surface to be unrelated. So what are some areas that you see that maybe the PHP community should maybe pay attention to, or how could we help out, or something along that lines?
I was just mentioning to Rich, I get a little bit jealous sometimes when I see people blogging and tweeting about, I just quit my job and I'm doing blockchain technologies full time. There's a lot of excitement, and it's in the news quite a bit about the number of VCs that are getting involved in this, the amount of investment. I think it might have even been BitPay that tweeted out, the amount of investment each year is growing exponentially, the amount of money going into this, because they see it's like, wow, 1993 internet, if I can actually own a piece of the internet, that's pretty incredible. So I think as developers, we're always looking at new skills, new technologies, new things that we want to be aware of that our employers or our startups might be interested in being involved in. I think this potentially could be one of the most exciting, incredible things. And I know this is a bold statement, but I would say even within my lifetime. I think I will tell my kids, yeah, I remember when governments used to print all the currency. I remember when, prior to the blockchain technologies, just like we say, I remember prior to the internet. I think it potentially could be more disruptive than the internet. And the internet has been incredibly disruptive, but with the Bitcoin, it impacts so many other areas of our life and how we do society and how we structure our cultures. And so I think as developers, it's something that we should be aware of. It's, again, that's where the investment is going. It's a skill set that's in huge demand right now. A lot of companies in the Bitcoin space are hiring like crazy, trying to find people who understand this thing, because it is kind of complex and it's still undefined. It's early internet days. People are deciding what it's going to be. So you get to play a part in that. And I think a lot of developers have that sense of, I want my life to matter. I want to have purpose. I want to have significance. I want to have done something that was incredible. This is that opportunity. You get an opportunity to define what the future is going to look like as it relates to this technology by your ideas, because it's really the Wild West in many ways. So to me, it's just super exciting. If I wasn't running a company, I'd probably be in it full time.
I'm a developer, so from the development perspective, this is really exciting time. This is the ground floor. We're writing libraries, we're writing interfaces, we're writing clients to consume these technologies, and you can get on the ground floor right now to help develop where the direction of some of these technologies are going. And I mentioned before, this is the most exciting technology segment I've ever worked in, and I love going to work every day and working on something related to Bitcoin, because this is disruptive. This is like beginning internet stages of things. I mean, you know, you've heard the phrase the Internet of Things. Well, now we're going to move to the money of things or the network of things. I mean, you can't stop this decentralized, open source, really philosophical movement. And I just, you know, there's so many opportunities, you know, from a merchant perspective. You know, I did consulting for a number of years, and, you know, a lot of the jobs I had was, you know, helping merchants integrate, you know, shopping carts, or, you know, set up an online store, or, you know, write a plugin for this cart, or, you know, how do we integrate, you know, ledgers, tax software. So, you know, there are tons of opportunities just from the, you know, the monetary perspective of development. So.
Yeah, I think the one thing that maybe is going to be the most significant over the next 5 years is just different kinds of incentivization schemes that were just impossible before. You know, kind of micropayments is a thing that, you know, can be integrated potentially into the fabric of, you know, a CMS, into the fabric of a kind of site, into the fabric of a kind of social network. And not just a micropayment that, you know, provides some kind of gimmicky kind of give back, but actually some kind of token that potentially has the value to kind of multiply or increase as that particular network grows, or, you know, that actually incentivizes people to promote that network. And I think that's something that, you know, for instance, with Swarm, we're finding has been a key part of our growth so far, is that there are so many people you know, who had a much easier access to it that kind of participated, you know, because we actually crowdfunded on our own platform in order to build our own platform, which is kind of meta. And, you know, and that was all, and the fact that we were able to take these things, like, you know, no bank would have, like, given us permission to, like, you know, receive all this money and hold it. Oh, what are you doing? Like, how did you end up with like $1 million of this money, and where did it come from? And this doesn't fit into our, like, you know, business policy and kind of things like that. But, you know, the Bitcoin world really is made up of people who are developers and technologists and thinking about this stuff. So it's way, way more accommodating to novel uses of technology than, like, anything that needs to run through a bank, like anything that needs to, you know, go through an older payment processing service, anything, you know, that you're probably having trouble with right now as far as, like, you know, they don't understand what I'm doing. It's like, we are people, and then I think, you know, you can say BitPay, or, you know, we're doing, who actually really understand these technologies and want to see them succeed. So that, in that sense, it's just like a lot of positive energy, I feel, behind, like, innovative technological solutions without the kind of middlemen that sometimes make things painful.
So you're all doing slightly, you know, the same things, but slightly different. So what are some areas that you see things going in the near future that we might start seeing in different news outlets and things like that maybe, you know, kind of, if you were to look into a crystal ball, where do you think that crystal ball is going to point?
Oh, that's not a hard question at all, right? I think the kind of like,
say I was an easy moderator.
Yeah.
I'm glad you're starting on this side of the
Yeah.
I'm trying to think about it.
Yeah.
I'd say kind of like I said earlier, I think regulation is going to be a problem. I think we've already seen this. I mean, how many, if you've been following it all, how many times have you heard, well, that's the death of Bitcoin? I mean, I've probably heard that probably a dozen times since I started following Bitcoin. There's going to be a lot of scare tactics, a lot of kind of media coverage to say, oh yeah, you know, like even just at lunch today, I got asked, well, aren't there all these shady businesses using it? Well, it's like, well, technically, no, percentage-wise, not really. There's quite a few more using the U.S. physical dollar. But I think there's going to be people pushing back on it, and there's going to be a lot of negative press, they're going to highlight the potential problems and not focus on the solutions. And for example, there's the concept of the other 6.5 billion people, the other group of people that don't have access to banking. In third world countries, they have a cell phone, and M-Pesa is another example of a digital currency that is allowing people to, again, store and transact with their own value. There's some incredible things that can be done with Bitcoin for people who don't have access to banking services. Well, then they don't need a bank anymore, and they can actually invest and have people invest in them. Some really incredible opportunities, and I don't know that the media is going to be highlighting that as much. Also, another big thing that was kind of touched on earlier is that Bitcoin is fundamentally different than the way we handle currencies and banking systems now. So when people say, oh, there was a hack in Bitcoin, often there was a hack in a company that took everyone's private keys and stored them centrally. which is kind of against the whole concept of Bitcoin. If you don't own the private key, you don't actually own the Bitcoin. So instead of having one place where there's 1 million accounts, that's obviously a place for a hacker to be interested in exploiting, you could have 1 million accounts all distributed across everywhere, and therefore there is a lot more security through that because there's not as much incentive to attack each and every one of those. So I think it's going to be scare tactics in the media, but then and not really highlighting the cool things that are going on. But then also, like I said, how we started an organization in Nashville, we're trying to push user adoption. There's a lot of merchant adoption. BitPay is just incredible how fast they're growing and how many merchants are getting on board, and we're trying to help with that with FoxyCart. You can just check a box and provide it on your checkout with no difficulty at all, no programming or anything. You can just be up and running and accept it. But there's this user adoption piece. People have to actually decide, I'm going to go and purchase Bitcoin with currency and then actually transact in my day-to-day using with Bitcoin to kind of promote, it's the chicken and egg problem. You know, you have merchants that are accepting it, but they need users who are spending it, and vice versa. They need vendors who are also going to, you know, that they can pay and keep it within Bitcoin as opposed to transacting directly into US dollar, which you can do as well with BitPay, which is very nice if you don't want that currency risk. So it's just, I'd like to see more stories about great user adoption. Just something this morning I read, there's a digital currency a government is actually thinking of using, or there's like MIT and other places where they're getting the student body involved in it, which is really exciting to me, especially technical colleges. So I'd love to see more of those stories as well.
Sure, we're seeing a lot of college adoption. You know, if you imagine going to college and you know, some of the more technical schools, you know, there's a large foreign population, and we were at Georgia Tech, and they were talking about how, you know, actually one time they had a student take like a garbage bag full of cash to the bursar to pay their tuition, and you know, first of all, I mean, that's obviously, you know, a security issue, you know, walking through campus with a bag full of money, and secondly, the fees that their parents had to pay to send that money to them, you know, it's outrageous. So, you know, the portability of funds, the you know, provability of the system. You know, the media likes to, you know, their job is to sell newspapers and to sell, you know, ad impressions on their website. So they're obviously going to report sensationalist, you know, ideas and stories, but you know, I'm sure FoxyCart can, you know, demonstrate that there are thousands and thousands and thousands. We have tens of thousands of merchants that are using Bitcoin as a currency every day without issues at all. And you know, those are the issues, or those are the situations that are primarily happening. These one-off, you know, companies that, you know, didn't have some sort of secure website or technology, whatever the problem was, and they got hacked, and you know, okay, well now Bitcoin's dead, or Bitcoin was hacked, and you know, it's not the case. So.
I just think there's going to be a lot of really weird things. So I don't know, like things that you wouldn't anticipate that like could never have been done before, and like, whoa, did that just happen? Like, you know, the fact that we crowdfunded on our own platform to build our own platform, you know, and just like had a bunch of Bitcoins, and not only did we raise in Bitcoins, we were raising this other like counterparty asset, and then now we have a ton of those sitting there, and then they went up 3x in value in like the last like 3 weeks. You know, it's just kind of like, there's a lot of just things you're like, whoa, like that's crazy, you know, like, and another really interesting about our platform that I was just thinking about based on what you were saying, is like, we don't actually touch anyone's money, if you can believe. We're running a crowdfunding platform in which we do not control anybody's money during the entire course of the crowdfunding campaign. It's all done through these other kind of you know, APIs, and it's like forwarded to someone else's address. And like, you know, we're kind of there, I mean, definitely providing some kind of information for people to receive, but even when you get the thing back, now we have these, you know, deterministic wallets, right? Where you can just get it. I have in this case, you have a 12-word passphrase that gives you complete access. You can have multiple addresses that are attached to that 12-word passphrase. So as long as you have that, you know, you get access, and we can know what's in what you have, but we do not have access to it. We're not controlling anything. It's kind of like all in your hands. So it's just like, there's just a lot of things where you're like, whoa, like this is really interesting, and then like this escrow thing's really interesting, and this other thing, and then somehow you like combine them together, and then you're like, whoa, I can't imagine that happening.
Yeah, it brings up a good point. You know, yeah, multi-sig wallets where you can have, you know, multiple people having to agree on a purchase, for example, in a company. You know, it's just, it raises the security level, obviously,
Yeah,
right away. And the money, first of all, the value isn't stored anywhere, at one company. Like if your bank, goes under for whatever reason, a lot of people, would lose their funds in that bank up to the limit that was insured. But the value is stored on the network, on the blockchain, on the, the network is the value. One company isn't storing, your funds, for example. So.
Yeah, and that fits extremely well within what we're doing in crowdfunding, is that actually when entrepreneurs or something like that are crowdfunding, then they get it too with one of these wallets where multiple people have to sign off. So there's no ability for one person to like run off with all of the funds, which has happened in the past in the Bitcoin world. But there's like these kind of systems of accountability, and that's actually one of the things I think is so awesome about decentralized networks in general. And there's like a long history on like emergent intelligence or collective intelligence, that when you like remove all these kind of barriers or kind of like centralized nodes, then people can kind of like freely share information. And I think that's like clearly what happened with the internet, right? It's like everything is just there, and then people just kind of spontaneously share information because there's not that friction. And now I think we're seeing the birth of that with some of this monetary stuff. It's like, oh, now this money can just go wherever it needs to without all the friction. And then that really greatly speeds up innovation. Actually, on a personal note there too, I was raising money for a micropayments platform a year ago, also relating to kind of digital currency. And I went to like some of the leading VCs in Europe when I was at the time. And then, they're there and they're just like, explain Bitcoin to me. This is like the first like question or something they asked. It was just like, dude, I do not want to spend like my valuable time as an entrepreneur explaining to some like, ex-Goldman guy who doesn't understand technology, like how Bitcoin works. Like, it's just like, it's a waste of my time as an entrepreneur. So if there's other people who are like-minded and, technological people who have Bitcoins that can just put them into things and remove the friction, then like we were, like a lot of these things, even venture capital funds themselves are not really necessary for a lot of kind of types of technological innovation. So, and if you can remove those people and let the innovation continue, that's pretty cool.
Awesome stuff. So we do have a question. So if you want to address the question to one person in specific, go ahead and call them out. Otherwise, it's open to whoever can answer it. And if all of you want to offer an answer, then that's fine too. Go ahead.
Hi. No, this is an open question. Hearing an interesting dichotomy between the 1.0 and 2.0 parts and the Bitcoin, the currency versus Bitcoin, the technological ecosystem. Luke sort of, in part of his last answer, mentioned how you have the currency volatility up and down and way up and way down again. The hesitation, from what I see, of a lot of places that accept Bitcoin to actually handle Bitcoin. They take Bitcoin on the checkout screen and immediately it's in their account in dollars through BitPay or somebody else. What do we think the chances are that Bitcoin 1.0 goes away? Basically, Bitcoin as the currency becomes sort of unnecessary or unvalued, but we are left with some sort of interesting blockchain-based tools that still carry on even when the currency is gone.
That's a great question. I'll give a first swing at that. One of the things that I always think about when I think about value, it's going to be in the network adoption. We were talking about the value stored in the network. And it's not always the best technology that wins. I mean, we see that with VHS and Betamax, that kind of thing. It's just the adoption rate, the network, the size of the network brings that value specifically and especially within blockchain technologies, because the more hashing power, the harder it is to hack that system. There was an altcoin recently that had a 51% attack, meaning the mining power wasn't big enough to secure the network, and so people were able to manipulate the system. And so when I look at, so there were a couple questions in there as I see it. I think that the volatility and those different concerns that Bitcoin has today has to do again with that network adoption. As the market cap goes much, much higher, which I hope to see as more users, again, that chicken and egg problem, as more users use it, then, and more merchants accept it, and the value of it goes up as more people want to be involved in the ecosystem. It's kind of like if a share of Berkshire Hathaway goes up and down by $1,000, people don't really notice because it's really expensive for one share. maybe a similar thing with Bitcoin. There's 100 million divisions in every Bitcoin, so you can, even if it goes up really high in value, you can still, you know, buy a stick of gum with it. So I think there'll be less volatility concerns, there'll be less issues with that, but as far as the value of Bitcoin itself and whether a 2.0 technology or a different thing will take over, personally, I kind of trust in open source. So there's enough of the core developers, people that are just fully devoted to Bitcoin itself, as opposed to some of the altcoins or some of the new ones that they're like, if they get threatened and something amazing comes along, they'll be like, hey guys, we got to fork, we got to adopt that, we got to bring that in. And we see that with frameworks, we see that all the time. If there's this cool thing they hadn't thought of before, they can make the change. It's open source. If everybody agrees and the network itself says, yeah, we think this is important. So I'd like to see Bitcoin itself evolve over time. And there's been a little bit of criticism of the Bitcoin Foundation or the core developers not moving quick enough, you know, taking too long on pull requests and things like that. And they're kind of like, hey guys, this is your thing too, get involved. And again, that's the call to us here in the room as developers. Get involved if we see something that's important as a threat to Bitcoin, the largest network that's out there, and we want to see this technology as a whole succeed. Why don't we just improve it? Why don't we make those adjustments as needed? And as you mentioned with the centralized mining, there are different algorithms for how we do mining. And some people think that the way Bitcoin is doing it, that allows for ASICs and centralized mining specific hardware is a problem, is a threat potentially. And so again, there are certain things that would be harder to change than others. But I also hear other people say, hey, if it changes some other thing, that's fine too. We can do side chains off the blockchain technology of Bitcoin, or we can just port it over and say, okay, now every Bitcoin here is now a token of this coin. It is the new Bitcoin 2.0, and we just keep moving along. We've seen this with open source technology in the past, and it's worked out okay. So I'm not too concerned about it, but it's a really great question. A lot of people are talking about it in the industry.
Yeah, it's very, I'm sorry. To take this one. It's very discussed. Yeah, I mean, I don't think anyone is really sure yet. You know, it may just be an evolution rather than like a replacement. You know, it may go from like dial-up internet to, you know, DSL, cable, you know, high-speed internet. You know, still the internet. You know, still the network is still, you know, pretty much in the same form as it was then. It's just better. You know, but one thing that, you know, you can look at, you know, there is some volatility in the commodity of the coin itself. But, you know, go back 100 years, look at the value of $1 to where it is today, and go back 100 years before that. You know, the value of $1 has only decreased over time, you know, with inflation. With Bitcoin, you know, it's really held its value. You know, it's worth a lot more than it was when you know, Bitcoins first started, you know, being traded. So it's a good investment.
I would say, you know, the jury is still out in the sense that, you know, I think the more innovation that's inside of like an ecosystem is what like contributes to that network effect growing. I think there's been a ton inside the Bitcoin ecosystem so far, but you know, there have been the sense in which the core protocol and things like that is very conservative. Satoshi himself decided to stay anonymous, and there hasn't been a lot of like, you know, active sort of government systems, so to speak, or whatever, like consensus systems to like allow that to evolve in a way that's acceptable to everyone. So the Bitcoin Foundation, which has ostensibly been responsible for that, hasn't been the most proactive kind of organization on some of those notes. And there's definitely competitors. I mean, there's definitely people who are offering things that could potentially provide the same service and would potentially even be more effective if they reach the scale of Bitcoin. So none of them are close to that at the moment, but you know, if Bitcoin and that ecosystem doesn't evolve to accommodate that kind of innovation, then there's definitely that threat. So, and you know, for instance, what we're doing right now is building on top of this Bitcoin blockchain, so sort of this third layer, if you want to call it that. And there are people from the, you know, first layer, second layer, who don't want us to be doing that. They say Bitcoin should only be about currency, and you shouldn't allow that. And there's been some kind of back talk about that. And there's a possibility that people will say, no, we only want to do currency as an application. And then someone like myself will be like, well, I have to go over here now because I'm sort of being pushed from, you know, the main Bitcoin ecosystem. I think the ultimate implication of that will be really, really bad for Bitcoin because, you know, we're building in the Bitcoin ecosystem now, but it's possible that things will move in that direction. So.
All right, any other questions? Anybody have anything else?
Does that answer your question, by the way, sufficiently?
Close enough.
Okay, great, great. So with that, one final thing, and that is if you,
we have another question.
Oh, do we? Okay, sorry.
Your talk was really nice, so thank you so much for taking out this time and actually coming down here to talk to us. I have a question which is, I think you guys have kind of touched it, but call me dumb, I could not get the answer to that. So there is a fluctuating price to Bitcoin, right? At beginning of this year, it almost touched, what, $1,000 or $1,100? And today it's 321 or 361. So definitely this is not something which is like a stock or a share which I should have as an investment, because I've already lost like 900 if I had even one Bitcoin there. So is it a taxable asset?
I mean, I guess
I'm not a lawyer, so
I'm not a lawyer. Definitely. So.
From a technology perspective, that's, I can talk to you about that, but you'd have to probably talk to your accountant about that.
It's money, right? I mean, it's something like shares.
Well, it depends on which government you ask, I guess, and even which state, because like I said, the bit licensing in New York, they're trying to do their own different thing. Again, don't quote me on this, but my understanding is they're treating it like a property, as we mentioned earlier, and so they're doing capital gains. And I know when I talked to my tax accountant, that's how I did it. My first Bitcoin was purchased in early 2013 at $20 a Bitcoin. So even at the $300 range, I'm kind of doing okay on my investment. So it is very volatile, absolutely, and everybody that gets in the Bitcoin space says, hey, don't invest money you're not willing to lose, because it's really just such early days, and the market cap is so small that the volatility will continue. But it's really interesting. I saw a tweet earlier that was like, here's the price on this month each year. So it said, 2009, 2010, 2011, 2012, 13, 14, and it's just up. I mean, if you go to the different sites that track the price of Bitcoin, it's up like, what, 12,000% or something like that from the early days. So it's just depending on your horizon, the window that you look at. And that's, I think, why so many VCs are confident in investing in Bitcoin companies, because they're looking long term. They see where it's going and they see it as inevitable. But yeah, it is a very, very volatile investment.
So with the physical dollar, we do have a cap for it, right? Because there is a regulatory organization which regulates how many of these physical currencies are actually printed. So what is the regulatory cap for Bitcoin?
I would say on that first one, in theory, this is why some government people in the government are asking for an audit of the Fed, because it's, in theory, we think about 80 million or 80 billion or whatever it was is being done every month, but we don't really know that. They kind of have a free rein to do whatever they want, because they're not really a government organization with the Federal Reserve and central banking globally in general. But as far as Bitcoin, it's the protocol itself. So if you look, I'd really highly recommend you can go to bitcoin.org and read the actual Bitcoin white paper. The protocol itself has in the algorithm, as you secure the network, there's what's called a block reward, a bit of Bitcoin that gets distributed to the network, to the miners that are securing the network, and that is a known quantity all the way to the year 2140. They can map it all out. So, and every 10 minutes someone confirms a block, that reward gets distributed, and every 4 years that block gets halved and halved and halved and halved. So it's just a really well-known thing. And a lot of the companies today, they're a little frustrated because they don't know how they can kind of look to the future if the dollar continues to get inflated. Or like I said, in Argentina or Venezuela, when there's incredible hyperinflation going on, it's like you can't plan as an investor. You can't plan as a business person. Well, with Bitcoin, you can. Now, you don't know what the value of the purchasing power of that might be, but you can at least know what the distribution is going to be.
Yeah, with the government currency, it's why it's called fiat, which is Latin for faith. I mean, you're taking the value of this $1, on faith, that's what it's worth. Because there's nothing backing it other than the word of the government. And, I'm not going to make a comment on that. But with Bitcoin as a currency, it's the more people that are involved in mining and using the currency, the more stable the currency is, and the more secure the network is. So, you can take comfort in the fact that, there's not a government that is printing this money, out of nothing. There's not a government that is, regulating exactly how many we're going to have and what the value of that is. It's like any other commodity. If you and I agree on a price, then that's what it's worth. So
I actually have a little bit of a contrary opinion on that, in the sense that I guess we've been very agreeable so far. So but I think there's this broader sense in like a lot of things come to incentive structures that are behind things, and central banks, ironically, have a huge incentive because they're participating by all the big businesses and everything else to create some kind of price stability in their currencies. So that obviously there's been major failures of that, like Argentina in the last 30 years, or other like Iceland has had a terrible, terrible time of that. But like the Federal Reserve, you know, one of the tools they use is printing money, and they don't necessarily give that money to the people who deserve it or anything else like that. So there's not problems. There's very big problems there. But they do have an incentive to keep it at a certain kind of price equilibrium, whereas incentives in the Bitcoin space at this moment are not really for that. Like the miners don't have the incentive for it to increase maybe, or a lot of people have incentive for it to like go up in value, but you know, and particularly like, you know, something like BitPay is someone who's, for most merchants, they're kind of taking it back into dollars immediately. So they don't even necessarily care about the price at any given moment in time because they're holding on to the dollars. So that creates an interesting incentive structure. I don't know that it can't ultimately align in some kind of price stability because I think there would be a lot of value to having price stability. But for the moment, that like the incentive structure is not really there to promote price stability in Bitcoin. So.
Thank you.
That's a great question.
Yeah, it is, definitely. So to you all, what is one thing, and we're going to close with this, what is one thing that you would like everybody to take away from this in relation to Bitcoin?
Wow. One thing I would say, you now have information, and you're now, you know, with information, with that responsibility, and there comes great responsibility with that. Like you can't say that you didn't know about Bitcoin now, you know. So for many, many years from now, when your kids ask you about, you know, how this all started, you can say, well, I heard about it in 2014 at this one conference. So please go and research it yourself, look into it. And granted, it can be the rabbit hole once you do that. I mean, I did that, like I said, in early 2013, and I was just blown away. And I'm just sitting there watching video after video, reading blog post after blog post, reading bitcointalk.org for days at a time and stuff. It's really incredible technology, and I would just encourage you to, hopefully this piqued your interest just a little bit enough to go read some about it, because this could potentially be a very, very significant thing within our lifetimes, and it's exciting to be a part of that this early on.
Sure, you know, it's one thing that, you know, I have small children, and I was remarking to my wife the other day that, you know, my kids are not, they're not going to know what it's like before the internet. Like, you know, growing up as a kid, I didn't have a cell phone. You know, we had landlines. There was no internet. We had to go to the library and read books, physical books, and you know, but the world's changing. The technology is changing. You know, with the advent of the internet came these electronic payment forms, and Bitcoin solves pretty much all of these problems related to transferring money and transferring wealth over a network like the internet. So yeah, Bitcoin is the currency of the future. It's the internet of money, and you know, now you can say that yeah, you know, we're at ZendCon in 2014, and that's when Bitcoin made a big debut.
I guess for me, I have a sort of personal incentive, and I also just am really excited by like the projects that we're seeing come through us and launching. You know, so encourage you to like you know consider participating in like the second wave of Bitcoin technology, and you know supporting some of these projects. Because one of the cool things now is you know it's actually because of what we're doing is like crowdfunding. You know, you can show up at swarmcorp.com and just kind of even pay, like get, you know, swipe your credit card or whatever, and then immediately get a share in some kind of part of this whole 2.0 wave of technology. So the actual access layer is very, you know, it's very streamlined, and it's also just a like awesome way to kind of immediately get access and kind of see the types of things that you can start to do with Bitcoin that you could never do before. So as we've been saying, a lot of this goes far beyond currency, and that's what I'm most excited about. And I encourage you to get a little piece of the excitement now. So,
thank you very much, guys. Everybody, let's give a warm thank you to our panel. Thank you for taking your time to come and share this with us, and hopefully everybody picked up something. One thing to keep in mind before we leave, please rate your talks. Go out to Joined In and rate the talks. If you've not turned in your survey for your shirt, get your survey filled out, and we're interested in what you have to say. Also, the same thing with our training table. Please provide the feedback. We're giving away a big elephant for that feedback. The win-win-win is exactly the same thing inside your pamphlet with all the schedule and everything. Please participate in that so you can give us feedback, Zend, about our products. And I thank you all very much, and enjoy your afternoon.